Hello, everyone, and welcome to our special panel, Middle Grade Thrills and Chills. This program is brought to you in partnership with the Ohioana Library and the 2024 Ohioana Book Festival. The Ohioana Book Festival is taking place in person on Saturday, April 20th from 10:30 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. at the Columbus Metropolitan Library's main branch in downtown Columbus. It will feature over 120 authors and illustrators across all genres and age groups. And the extra special thing about this festival is that all the authors and illustrators are from Ohio. Tonight is one of the festival's kickoff events, and we are so excited to be here with this panel of amazing Ohio authors and illustrators. To get us started, I am Kathryn Powers, and I am wearing two hats this evening. Although my hats I should have worn an actual hat like Wolfgang over here. That would have been more fun. But so my two imaginary hats, so you can imagine them on top of each other for this evening. They are, hat number one is that I am the regional advisor for Central and Southern Ohio, the chapter of Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And it's a very long name that we happily shorten to SCBWI. And hat number two is that I'm also the assistant director at the Ohioana Library. So if you couldn't tell from both of those hats, the Ohio literary community is near and dear to my heart, and I am thrilled to bring two of my favorite organizations together to talk about middle grade books this evening. So for anyone new to the realm of children's literature, SCBWI is a global professional organization for children's writers and illustrators, and that incorporates everything from board books through young adult books. So all the ages in between. And it also includes members from all over the world, as well as at all points in their publishing careers, from multi-published best-selling authors and illustrators to folks who are just dipping their toes into the industry. And it's wonderful to see those careers bloom as well. We have lots of people who just start, brand new, and then they'll, 5 years later, 10 years later, they're multi-published and helping everybody else get published. It's a wonderful community. So I myself have been a member since 2008 and have learned so much about craft and publishing over my 16 years as a member. But even better, SCBWI helped me find a fantastic community of like-minded writers and illustrators who are really supportive of each other and share a love of all things kid lit. So if you're interested in writing or illustrating, please visit scbwi.org/regions/Ohio Cen-South. And I will put that in the chat so people can actually have the direct link to that. They recently got a new website that all the regions are part of, so they're a little longer now. So I'll pop that in there later. Or visit scbwi.org to learn more about the global organization and membership benefits. I also want to thank the Ohioana Book Festival sponsors and partners, all of whom you can find listed on the Ohioana website. And a special thanks to the official festival bookseller, the Book Loft of German Village. You can get copies of all the books featured on this panel and featured at the festival by going online to bookloft.com. So two quick housekeeping items. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of this panel. So that'll be around the last 15 minutes or so. So please use the Q&A feature. You will find that at the bottom of your screen to chat or to type in questions at any time during our discussion this evening. Also, closed captioning has been enabled for this program as well. You will find a closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, which you can toggle on and off at any time. So, and now I'm very pleased to welcome our guests, Ohio authors and illustrators, John Anderson, aka Vilnius Oorte, for this book. We have Wolfgang Parker, Natalie D. Richards, and Erik John Slangerup. I'm going to give very brief introductions and then we'll jump into question one. But John Anderson, pen name Vilnius Oorte, has haunted the towns and countryside of Central Ohio for decades. While his exact origin remains a mystery, sightings of this elusive being have increased in recent years, prompting local officials to urge members of the public to exercise caution when approaching. Too Scary to Read Alone marks his debut as an illustrator. So welcome, John.
Thank you.
We've got Wolfgang Parker was notorious as a child for decorating his parents' house for Halloween at the beginning of September. I love that. I was the opposite. I was the kid who wanted to decorate for Christmas at that time of the year, but I love the Halloween decorating. So he is more recently known as the accidental author of the award-winning Crime Cats middle grade mystery series. Too Scary to Read Alone is his fourth book and his first horror title. He lives in a haunted house in Columbus, Ohio. So welcome, Parker. Or, I'm sorry, welcome, Wolfgang. I'm sorry, I had that written wrong. And next we've got Natalie. Eve Richards is a New York Times bestselling author. She has published 9 young adult thrillers, and her most recent book, 15 Secrets to Survival, is her first middle grade novel. A champion of literacy and aspiring authors, Natalie is a frequent speaker at schools, libraries, and writing groups. She lives in Central Ohio with her 3 children and very large dog whose name is Wookie, and that is just adorable. So welcome, Natalie. And last but certainly not least, we have Erik John Slangerup. He grew up in a magical time before cell phones or the internet. It was called the 80s. He spent most of it roaming outdoors unsupervised, which inspired him to write tales of adventure, including his middle grade series, Far-Flung Falls. He has also written several picture books, including the award-winning Dirt Boy. He lives in Columbus and is the father of 6 kids, which has been his biggest adventure yet. Welcome, Erik. So, from things that go bump in the night to outdoor adventures, the books by these 4 authors and illustrators keep readers on the edge of their seats and eagerly turning the pages. So, I'm really excited to chat about middle grade chills and thrills with you all. So, let's dive in. And first off, can you all tell us a little bit about your book festival title and road to publication journey? And let's go ahead and we'll start this one alphabetically. So, John, if you'd like to get us started, letting us know a little bit about the book you guys are bringing and your road to publication journey.
Well, it's funny that you start with me because it's honestly Wolfgang's book. He just brought me to do the
You
illustrations.
guys can tag team as well, because I know you're a team.
Okay. Well, the title of the book is
Too Scary to Read Alone.
There you go. And it's a series of stories that Wolfgang has been working on for a few years. He brought me in as the illustrator because he wanted to get a certain kind of look that was very reminiscent of books that we had grown up with, some of the comic books that we had experienced as kids that had darker themes. And so that's where the partnership arose from. But that's all I can tell you. I'm going to leave the rest to him.
Perfect. Well, Wolfgang, we'll have you jump in then.
Yeah. This is, as it said, my first book of for horror titles. And I wanted to, I'd been wanting to do this for a very long time. I've been listening or reading short stories, horror stories only for probably 7 years. So this was a big deal to do this and be able to work with John on this. But it was a combination of our shared love for, I think, very similar influences. And I actually got into publishing through Crime Cats. Which is a mystery series, middle grade mystery series. It's won 9 awards, but I'm strictly self-published. So that's been my road's pretty much been like the Bruce Springsteenian road of just selling everywhere I can and as much as I can.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I will warn everybody, the music is getting louder behind me, so I'm going to mute myself in between questions here. So, Natalie, would you like to jump in next and let us know a little bit about your book, as well as your road to publication journey?
Okay, so it's been a road, Kathryn. It's been quite a journey. First of all, I'm very old and very grateful that we have some nice soft lighting here so that you don't see how old I am. This is my 10th book. 15 Secrets to Survival is my first middle grade, but actually my 10th book. I live on fear. That's kind of what I sell and what my books are about. They are really tapping into the scary side of life. I've written 9 young adult novels that are thrillers. And then I decided what was happening is I'm kind of ridiculous. If you've met me in person or seen me on a panel, I'm a little bit loopy and a little bit ridiculous. And I'd have a lot of teens and adults come to my panels wanting to read, and they would bring their younger kids or younger siblings with them. And then those kids would rush to my table and be like, "You're so funny. I want to read your book." And I'm like, "You're 8. I have dead bodies, and a lot of them, you might not want to read my books." So after a while, I thought, I want to write those books. I still think there is a real market for that. I still think there's a lot of kids out there that want to be afraid, but maybe not quite as afraid as I was when I was reading Dean Koontz at 11. So I thought I want to write something that's really both scary and funny. And that is where 15 Secrets to Survival came from. So 15 Secrets to Survival is a book about 4 kids who get in pretty big trouble in middle school for doing something on text messaging they shouldn't be. They're being really horrible to each other. So they get punished by being sent to a camp in Montana, and their camp counselor goes missing. So they are left in the snowy mountains to survive. So it's a survival thriller. And all they have to guide them is the pages of a homemade survival guide that they're kind of piecing together clue by clue. So it's a little bit scavenger hunt, a little bit hatchet, and a little bit of a thriller all rolled into one. And there's also a good bit of humor, which that was the big thing that was really fun for me, is my young adult thrillers don't really have a ton of horror or humor in them. They veer into horror enough that it's a little hard to bring in true humor. But this was able to do that, and I had a lot of fun with it. So bringing fear and humor in at the same time was really enjoyable to me. So I've loved this journey. It's been great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Of course.
And Erik, would you like to tell us about the book you're bringing and a little bit about your journey to publication?
For Ohioana, we're featuring Molly and the Mutants. It's the sequel in my series. Started with Molly and the Machine that came out a couple years ago, and it's a sci-fi action adventure series set here in Ohio in the 1980s, because that's a decade that I know and love. And the mutants are the giant mutant frogs that are very large and very hungry. They're trying to devour the kids. So kind of in the spirit of Stranger Things, it's kids on bikes roaming around trying to solve problems. I kind of came at middle grade, I just realized, from the opposite end of the spectrum from Natalie, because I started my publishing career in picture books, and I kept trying to write them longer and longer, while the trend was, this was several years ago, the trend was, back then you could still get a picture book with maybe up to 1,000 words. I don't think you can find one now with more than 500 words, but I kept trying to go like longer than that, and I was really struggling with it. My editor said, why don't you try middle grade, and then you can just go nuts. And that worked out really great for me. And she realized that like my voice and my humor was better suited for a slightly older audience. Like I wanted to go like a shade darker, as opposed to, I guess, a shade lighter if you're starting from the adult end of the spectrum. And so it gave me a lot more freedom and liberty to kind of write what was in my heart.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And from reading all of your books, I can say they definitely all deliver on the chills and thrills. So yes, they are really fun reads. And there was a lot of humor in them as well, from the voices of the tweens, and Too Scary to Read Aloud, or I'm sorry, Too Scary to Read Alone, and probably Too Scary to Read Aloud, honestly. But as well, Natalie and Erik, you both have so much fun humor in yours as well. But for middle grade, the voices, so thrilling and chilling books, they are really always popular in the middle grade market. So for young readers growing up in today's world, what do you think draws them to these types of books? And I will actually go reverse alphabetical order this time, which means Erik, you're up first.
Oh, this has been something on my mind. Like, I'm curious why. I'm always thinking about when I was the age of my readers now, about the things that worried me. And in my mind, I just feel like life seems so much safer in a, like in a day-to-day way. I'm always fascinated that the playgrounds around my neighborhood have rubberized floors. Like it seems a lot like there's a lot more thought for safety, like physical safety of kids. But then when I talk to kids, they've got the same kind of like more existential worries that when I was a kid, it was nuclear war, and now it's climate change. And I'm just wondering if I think that maybe when you read a book that has a very kind of granular and specific thing to fear that you can confront and resolve in some way, it helps to serve as a metaphor in some way for some of the larger things in your life that I'm not sure, like as an adult, I don't know what to do about. And I'm sure as a kid, maybe it feels too big to approach as well. So I think it's maybe helpful to kind of like find a way to compartmentalize some of those feelings in a way that we can, just work with a little better. But I don't know. I want to hear what other people say.
Well, Natalie, do you want to go next then?
I do. I always want to go after Erik because I adore him, frankly. So I love that, Erik. That's awesome. I feel like for me, when I talk to readers and also just kind of thinking back to that time in my life, there is still a fear of being out of control, right? I think that's when you're a kid, that's one of the hardest things is you can't really control your own life or the world around you. So if there is a fear, and frankly, in our world, there probably often is. I know my kids have the fear of like, who's in charge here? Like, this is all very crazy. The wildfires and the various things happening, you know, civilly and otherwise, it's really frightening and they're really out of control. So I think sometimes you could maybe see some allegory there, some compartmentalization. I love that. But I write from the aspect of, let me just give them an escape. Let me give them a way to totally suspend everything that's happening in their real world, and they can just slide into this universe. Some people do that. Actually, Christy Boyce is on this call. She's fantastic. If you guys don't know her, she writes these amazing, funny, romantic comedies. One of them, I think it's from Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, I'm probably wrong on that name, Christy. I'm so sorry. It's doing so well right now because people can really escape into that and just really enjoy this wonderful love story with a lot of fun.
Dungeons and Drama.
Thank you. Woo!
It took me a second.
So Dungeons and Drama is out. Go check that out. But if you are not able to slip into a romance, if that's not really your thing, and unfortunately, when I was a kid, it wasn't something I could slide into. I didn't really maybe buy into that entirely when I was young, but I could be scared into paying attention. So if you scared me enough, Dean Koontz, I'm talking to you. You are not listening, but I am talking to you. So Dean Koontz, Stephen King, they were doing things that could take me away from everything scary happening in my world. I think to this day, that's still a reality for writers, is we have that power with fiction to say, let's let go of all that for a minute, and you can get wrapped up in this very scary story that has nothing to do with real life. And that's a really powerful tool as well. And it's one I love and I've used for 10 years now. I'm hoping to use it for a lot more.
Love that. Escapism is always one of my favorites as well, for sure. Wolfgang, would you like to hop in with your thoughts?
Yeah. So I just glanced at the questions before we started. So this is a really interesting question. I found with this book, I found with even the mystery books that I write, I tend to write very consciously. And with horror, I had a really traumatic childhood. And so I didn't want to write something that was like silly, spooky, because that did not appeal to me as a kid. I think part of what drew me to the books that I did read was looking for answers. And as a child, as somebody else had pointed out, you know, you don't have a lot of agency in the world. And looking back, I realized like how little agency I had, and how crazy and chaotic the people who were immediately around me were, and then the world at large, of course. Talking about the fear of nuclear war, existential things. I found out from a horror movie who Nostradamus was. I had asked my mother who Nostradamus was. She told me that he predicted the future, and that he had predicted the end of the world would happen in 1999. And I cried myself to sleep for a year straight, every night, thinking I was going to die, and how old I would be when I died, and how I wouldn't have really done much with my life. I couldn't do much with my life, being a child and having no agency. So with these stories, I thought about it for a couple of years. I put a lot of I'm trying to think of what I'm looking for. There was a lot that these stories had to do. They had to meet, they had to check off a lot of things. And I kind of went back to what the Grimm brothers did for horror stories in the Western world. That's kind of where it began popularly. And so they had to have a moral teaching. There had to be something there that I was trying to speak to readers and use horror as a language for survival in the real world, and using allegory to be able to do that, even with existential fear and terror. Because I mean, the fact is, like, there is a lot of there is a lot of padding. Kids are wearing bike helmets. They're not doing the stupid stuff that we did in the 80s growing up, but they have a world that's literally like burning that they're growing up in. We had the fear of nuclear war. These kids are going to witness like some real bad stuff. And from my experience of visiting schools, I've done like 20 different school visits. I've talked to a lot of kids at this age range, and they're not stupid. They take everything in. They're just as I was. They, even outward appearance, they may not be that withdrawn or maybe like outwardly reflective, but essentially that's what I tried to do with these stories. There had to be something that really entertained me and that really engaged me, but I feel like more than anything, like I think people are looking for answers, and maybe if it's not the answer, maybe like an answer of how do I deal with this, like for me, even if the rest of the world can't get it together to do anything about it, how do I live through this? Because what other choice do I have? I know that's super grim, but
It absolutely makes sense. Yeah, very true.
thus is the world.
Yes, yeah, for sure. John, kind of any additional thoughts? I know this is your debut project. Kind of any thoughts on why kids are drawn to the spooky and the adventurous?
Well, I think there's a few things. I mean, obviously, there's the question of what's allowed. Kids love to get involved in things that their parents definitely don't want them looking at or hearing about. So there's that draw of the forbidden. There's also, I think, a certain amount of projection of their own experiences into what they're reading. They want to see how the protagonist is going to deal with it because they're kind of wondering, well, how would I deal with it? So I wouldn't call it a learning thing. I don't think they pick up horror stories to learn something about how the world works. I don't think that it's that deliberate. But I think there is a need or a desire to be able to come away with something from it that gives them just a glimmer of an idea of maybe how you deal with bad situations when they arise. And you can apply that lesson to a situation regardless of its scale. So if you're looking at it on the big screen, as it were, and then you have to apply it to a sitcom TV situation, maybe it's just a little bit better because at least you're not going up against Greg from Wolfgang's story. I think that's about it.
Absolutely.
Greg.
Yeah, I know. That's spooky cover.
That is a spooky cover.
It is.
That was the intent.
Nice.
That was what we were going for.
Absolutely. And yes, despite the spooky cover, books are definitely safe spaces where, all these things can be explored for kids. So I definitely, I love that answer. And since we're talking about the cover, I actually really think that this is a great segue into the next question, because all of these books that we're talking about tonight have one important thing in common, and that is edge of your seat suspense. So how do you achieve this in your writing for the authors with us? Do you have any tips to help authors create more suspense in their work? And then on the illustration side of things, what techniques do you use to pull emotions from readers, like fear or excitement? Obviously, we were all saying, "Ooh, what a spooky cover!" So it worked there for sure. How are there certain techniques that you use for that? To just get those emotions and keep them drawn to the page. And actually, since we're talking about illustration, John, do you want to go first on that?
Sure. I'll take a stab at it. When I started the illustrations for this project, I was coming from a background of a game that I'd been working on for about 13 years. and doing the various drawings. And that's kind of on the back burner right now, so we won't discuss it. But it did give me a lot of experience in trying to figure out how to get certain feelings across. And for that, I'll be frank, I stole a great deal from film, especially the golden age of horror. You've got those great scenes where the camera is moving through the graveyard and the mist is just hanging there in the air. And it's so creepy. And that's kind of what my takeaway from being a kid and watching Fritz the Night Owl. I mean, you know, we're all Central Ohioans here. We all remember growing up watching that. But those great old movies, and if you had the great fortune to be able to watch it in the middle of the night without your parents being there, you could just get the bejesus scared out of you. But that was what I was always going for. I wanted to, and I kept pushing for a long time to go with that more eerie sense, because I think that really speaks to something very visceral in all of us. And this really gave me, I would say, an opportunity to sort of reach the apotheosis of that attempt. I think that the work I'm doing with Wolfgang is much more involved and much more intriguing than what I was doing on my own. I think he's actually pushed me towards an even greater understanding of how to achieve that. But I mean, they're simple tricks. If you go back to the era of film, they're odd camera angles. They're things that are intentionally asymmetrical, so that your brain is going, well, that doesn't look right. It shouldn't be like that. And if you can build those things up into sort of a visual pastiche, it can end up being very unsettling. And that's what I'm going for. And I get the feeling that maybe 2-3 more volumes of these, and you're not going to want to pick up that book and look at that picture if I'm doing my job right.
Yeah.
It'll be the book that you flip upside down on the bed.
Yeah. Or you say, Mom, will you read this to me? I don't want to look at those pictures again.
Yes. That's wonderful, because we definitely have illustrators in the audience. So like, just love hearing where the inspiration comes from for that. Erik, you look like you were raising your hand.
Okay, Mike, can I have a turn?
Yes.
John, just you sparked a memory I had when you're talking about film. It reminded me. I can't remember before streaming, you'd buy the box set of the movies, like the director's cut, and you'd get all this extra interviews and stuff. I can't remember the director, but I was listening to this interview a while back. It was talking about restraint when you're trying to, and I think that you're hinting at that too, that golden age is that, like, if you watch a lot of horror movies now, there's some good horror out there, but back in the day, if a director would show, like, what the camera angle would show down the pit, and you'd see like all the crocodiles, and then you'd show the tied up damsel getting ready to be pushed off, and then you'd get ready to push her off, and then that's all you'd see, and you would put all of that together. You'd connect the dots as the viewer, because just like, you're in partnership with the creator when you're consuming that piece, and what you create in your mind is way worse than anything you'll ever see or that you'll ever read. But now in a lot of those movies, they just have to get right into the gore and the viscera of that scene. And I feel like that's worse. I feel like with writing a book, if you think about that principle of restraint, you get those dots just close enough where where they can make that connection in a very real way, so that you have to kind of dole it out little bits at a time. It's like if you have a monster, you want to just give a little tiny hint of what that monster might sound like, and then maybe a shadow of the monster before you just reveal the whole monster. It bugs me now with movie trailers that you see the monster, you don't want to, you got to show some restraint. So I think one of the reasons that age was a golden age is because creators really understood that idea, that you really parsed it out in a measured, paced way, so that it's so satisfying when you finally do see a monster in all its glory. You freak out because you've been waiting for it, building it up in your head over all that time. Books do it the same way.
And actually, that's one of the limitations of illustration. I can't do a jump scare. How do I draw a jump scare? It can't be done.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of limited in that way, but that forces me to use the tools that I do have as effectively as I can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. I love all of that. Wolfgang, what do you think? How do you kind of make sure to keep your writing suspenseful? Kind of any tips for the writers in our audience?
Yeah, I mean, take it for what it's worth. I mean, this is my first foray into this. I guess that's my pitch for reading the book, let's see how good or bad it is. I think for me, the stuff that I listen to and that I read, I say listen to because I read and then I listen to a lot of audio, like I guess books, but the stuff that is the most influential on me that I've listened to the most is weird fiction from the early to mid 20th century. The Lovecraft and his entire like circle of cronies. So that stuff, characters were kind of just a device for the reader to experience whatever kind of concept they came up with, but they were not big on like creating a character that was memorable in any way. And I, as a writer, am not big on concept. That isn't the thing. Like I marvel at their concepts, especially the fact that no like psychedelic drugs were used at that time or anything else because it wasn't around. And that was just like, they were just coming up with this stuff. But now when I'm writing, characters is the biggest thing. With Too Scary to Read Alone, those 5 stories, I tried to explore different types of horror so it wasn't the same thing all the time. And as well, I had to come up with a character to connect with the audience in some way. Some of those characters I know, my test readers hated them, but they were supposed to kind of hate them. And then it was more fun to kind of turn them around so that the reader in the end had a lot of empathy for that person, even though they absolutely hated them for like the first, 35 pages of the book. And then other characters, I just wanted to make them as real as possible. The more that you anchor an audience into the world that you're writing about through the character, that they feel that these characters are real, they're real people. That's when any of that kind of visceral stuff, that's when it becomes incredibly effective, especially if you're piecemealing it out. You don't give it all away. And that's like a rule of thumb. Every great horror story is propelled by a great mystery. The heart of it, that is the thing. And I kind of felt the advantage I had being a middle grade mystery writer going into horror. I definitely understood that part of it. But yeah, those are kind of fundamental things. You want to root it in reality, make it feel real through the character. And then the supernatural stuff, if that's what it is, it's easier for the audience to buy. It's easier to suspend their disbelief because everything seems fine. It all seems real, like, you're right there. And then all of a sudden something weird starts happening. The reader should be intrigued by this and want to know. And then the more it unfolds, the more unnerving, the more, the scarier it gets. So, yeah, that would be my advice. I mean, that's what I shoot for. Again, I don't know how successful I've been in it, but that's the attempt.
Thank you very much. And I'll say I thought it was definitely successful from reading the book.
Oh,
so
thank you.
don't worry about that. And Natalie, would you like to hop in with your experience, because you have many books now that are you've been keeping readers on the edge of their seats. So kind of any tips for writers?
So I teach a lot of writing workshops, and I think I feel really lucky to be able to do that. That's one of the most exciting things I do as a writer, is seeing other writers kind of grow into themselves and create their own work. So it's really fun. And I do think there are actually some really, nuts and bolts things that you do that are not sexy. They're not big and philosophical. They're really just nuts and bolts things that you do when you're writing suspense. One of those things is really careful editing. So you can write whatever you want. You can flop all over the place. Your book is going to kind of spiral out. Your characters will be wishy-washy. That's all fine. That's part of the process. What you do as a suspense writer, a thriller writer, a horror writer, any of those things, they're kind of feeding on the same general feeling or emotion. So because of that, when you edit, you have to be really careful to remove a lot of that flippity flop. There can't be any fat. It needs to be very lean. So that's the first thing, is your scene may sprawl and you need to rein it in. It needs to be very tight by the time you're done. Another thing that I think helps me personally is present tense. I often write in present tense with suspense because it leaves me, people can do it every which way, and it's great. I've read every imaginable version of horror, and many of them are nothing like mine and are incredibly effective. But what I do, what works for my voice, is putting everything in present tense. And I think the reason that works for me is there's a sense of immediacy that automatically breeds an element of suspense for me, for my voice. And that's not saying everybody's voice is that way. For me, a lot of dialogue, a lot of action, and not dwelling too much in description that is not building an atmosphere that is directly kind of related to the suspense. So there are times like my next YA novel that comes out is 49 Miles Alone. This is a book set in the backcountry in Utah. Setting is a character in this book. It's very important, and it's very much part of the suspense. They are trying to survive the desert, so describing the desert is important in this book. In other books, that may not be as important. So kind of knowing where to trim your description and where to really hone your scenes into a fine edge, I think is really important to suspense. I think other things that are good are not, watching yourself, not that you're not dropping too many hints, clues, being too heavy-handed with things. Those are common things I see. People often send me things like, can you look at this? Can you tell me what you think? Mistakes I see are often like, you're a little heavy-handed with it. One of the mistakes I see that I would encourage anyone who's watching that is a writer is watch your villain. Your villain is the hero of their own story. We've all heard this, right? That's really important. Develop that character. If your villain is just moo ha ha monster, that doesn't work. I also really subscribe to the Stephen King belief, and those of you who have not read his book on writing, get off of this webinar and go buy that book. That is your first assignment. It's really powerful. One of the things he talks about is the monster behind the door. Jaws worked in the late 70s. Jaws, of course, everybody knows. It worked for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons it worked was because of a malfunctioning prop. The shark in that movie wasn't good. It didn't work. So they had to rely on other methods. But what happened, just like Erik talked about earlier, we are terrified because we can't see it. We don't know what this thing is coming. So when you can kind of hold that monster back, often that can help you in suspenses. Just keep them behind that door a little longer. Let us wonder, what are they going to do? How bad is this criminal? How bad is this villain? What are they really up to? Those kinds of things can really help you when you're writing to develop a story, because it's one thing to scare someone in a scene. It's another thing to hold them afraid for 250 pages. That's a different element. So those are all a random assortment of things that may work for you. But as with anything else with writing, everybody's mileage varies. You're going to find the things that works for you. Read the books that scare you. Take a few notes. What is it that scared me about this book? Why did it work for me? Why did I escape into it so well? And what works for your voice? And those things together are really what build it.
Those are great tips for sure. Thank you so much for sharing all those. And that applies to so many different genres of writing too. Like, it's wonderful.
It's true. Yeah, it does. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So Erik, how about you? How do you keep readers flipping the pages and on the edge of their seats for your adventures?
One part of it for me is about the stakes. I always think about, what's at stake, and I try to ratchet that up in a way that sneaks up on the reader a little bit. I think, Natalie, I haven't read your adult stuff, but I really, with 15 Secrets, that I think you did a really great job at that, where you start off getting invested in the characters and you realize kind of what they're worried about, what's on their mind. And then the stakes get higher and higher, they really do. And I think that's how real life situations, like bad situations like that, how we experience them in our lives. You know, all of a sudden we're like, the things I'm worried about day to day are, it's all relative, right? They're not that big a deal, but man, they might seem relevant at that moment. And then all of a sudden something big happens, you know, thunderclaps, and you're like, wait a minute, hold on, that might be something a little bit scary. So I think figuring out a way that you kind of, you know, continue to bring your reader along, and as they realize the stakes get higher and higher until they reach that crescendo. I like how that's done in Jaws, for example. That was another great example, and I love how that's done with a moose as well. You know,
My maniacal moose.
or your maniacal moose,
As you do.
Or, you know, or giant mutant frogs. You have to kind of build up to it.
I love the frogs. I think it's amazing.
I like to, oh, thank you. You know, I love how when you play video games, you have the boss, you get to the boss at the end. And I kind of structured this last book that way too, where you start off, you get these, oh, what is that, a 20-pound frog? That is a giant frog. Oh, wait. And they get bigger, and there's like one the size of a grizzly bear now.
Oh, wait, there's more.
Oh, wait, we'll make it the size of a dump truck. You know, so I like bringing the reader kind of along with you in those steps. And sometimes it doesn't make as much sense to get right up to here immediately. Unless you do it that way. I don't know, but that's bringing them along is fun.
Yeah. And that's exactly how it felt for sure, Erik, with the bigger and bigger, and the video game. Yeah. So
the big boss.
Yes. Yeah. I mentioned before, all these books really deliver on their promises for thrills and chills. So like, I'd say these are experts here for sure. Like, definitely read these books and, you know, follow what they're doing to learn how to, you know, keep readers turning the pages. So these, you know, were all excellent and just, you know, fun and exciting reads for sure. So we are at the 7:45 mark. So I'm going to ask a question while I'm at the point of the day that I'm also losing my words. So the audience now, I'm going to give you time to put your questions into the Q&A feature. You should be able to do that. I know we had a little bit of problems earlier with the permissions. So if anybody tries to pop one in there and it isn't working, just pop a comment into the chat and I can keep track of them there as well. But yes, so if you have a question for our Q&A section, we'll go ahead and have you put that in the chat. And then while everybody is typing, I will ask our panelists another question. And so this will just be a short one while everybody's typing that in. And this question is, are there any specific books, authors, or illustrators who inspired you to become creators of books for young readers? We've talked about this a little bit, but I, you know, would love to hear even, you know, what you loved as a kid and maybe what inspired you, you know, more recently. And I'll go out of order this time. We'll start in the middle. Natalie, I'll have you go first.
Gosh, you know, what inspired me to write for young readers? First of all, I feel really lucky. I think that my readers are great. It's amazing to write for a younger audience who are figuring out who they are. They have their opinions in a way that a lot of adults are afraid to have. Like, you know, kids in the age of really 10 to 20, and that's, you know, kind of the stretch now. I've got a bigger stretch. Even 8 and 9-year-olds, they really have opinions on things that are absolutely unfettered. And I love it. Like I am, you know, I have all this history and, you know, cynicism, it grows as you grow older and it's a little different when you're younger. And I love that. Even when you have a hard life as a young adult, you still have an energy about you that you're like, I can still do this. You're not as beaten down in some ways. So that's kind of cool to see. And I feel very lucky. But for me, honestly, when I was young, all I had, when I wanted to look at a scary book, all I had was Dean Koontz and Stephen King. So when I was very young, probably far too young, I was reading the likes of Stephen King and Dean Koontz. And I maybe would have loved at 8 or 9 to have a bridge book that was maybe a little less, or maybe there were times when I was home alone. I was home a lot. I was a latchkey kid and I was an only child and I had divorced parents. So I was really alone a lot. And there were times when I would be alone late at night. My mom was a bartender. I didn't maybe want to read Stephen King, but I did. And then I didn't sleep and became a writer. So Stephen King and Dean Koontz did really, really inspire me. But so in a very different way did Judy Blume, because she was and is our queen forever. But she wrote these incredible books that really were for our age, but they weren't scary. And that's what I wanted. So I think it was a combination of the two things together that I thought, why can't I have a Judy Blume who's writing something really scary for me that maybe is still going to let me sleep at night?
That's fantastic. And I love not wanting to sometimes read things by yourself late at night that are going to scare you. So sometimes those are better in the daylight, some daytime reading books. Wolfgang, I'll hop to you as we kind of go out of order here.
Yeah, I actually wanted to piggyback on that, Natalie. So one of the things that actually I became familiar with, like the middle grade rules for writers, and with this book, I wanted to be very cognizant of what those rules were. And I also wanted to know, because a lot of the people around me were really prolific readers as kids. I was not. I was like nearly illiterate for, and I'm not even joking, like for a lot of my life as a kid. I was a terrible student, really terrible at reading. But I wanted to know when people started reading Stephen King and Dean Koontz, and Reddit is a great resource for things like that. So around like, yeah, eight, nine, that's when it starts. And especially for people who stay with horror throughout their life. And so this book, Too Scary to Read Alone, I tried to write exactly what Natalie was talking about, a gateway that was something that was definitely made for kids, but way darker, and starting you down that road for something takes you more seriously as an audience. It's not silly. It's not like silly spooky. It's not like Scooby-Doo, but it's also not like so, graphic and hard as adult horror by any means, but it gives you a taste of that. It makes you start being able to kind of consume that in a way. So that's really what I started for me, and that comes from being a kid in the 80s. I think I've read from the probably late 70s to the mid 80s. I've read every single book for children's short stories. And what I found out was that they were all very short, like the stories. I think the gimmick was like you can read it before bed, like one story, which forces the writer basically to like have no actual story and no ending. So it's just like eye roll after eye roll. I probably found, maybe 10 gems out of countless books. With this, the stories are longer, as you know. And so I broke them up into parts, so they could be digested a little easier. And so that goes back to like the mystery cliffhanger, pacing the story the right way to be able to do that. But yeah, I wanted something really scary when I was a kid. I wanted something that was written for kids, but was actually scary. And so that's what I really set out. That was one of the parameters that I made for myself. It had to be really scary, but in being really scary and possibly breaking those rules, like not everybody makes it out alive, there had to be something of value there, some sort of moral teaching. And to not hog any more time, this leading into who influenced, I would say for this age range, John Bellairs and the team of John Bellairs and Edward Gorey for the Anthony Munday. I can't remember the other two that they did, but John and I were both deeply influenced by those series.
Yep.
John, we'll hop right back into you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here waiting to say John Bellairs and Edward Gorey, and you just took it right away from me. But no, that was a huge influence, and I'm not sure that I'm the oldest person on the panel. I'm not 100% sure, but I suspect that I am. And when I was a kid, there was no such category. It didn't exist in any way, shape, or form, and that includes books by Stephen King and Dean Koontz. I didn't have those growing up. What I had were murder mysteries that my parents read and I stole from them, and they dealt with death in a very direct way, so to speak. I mean, it was still You know, these were not gory books by any means, but they had a very definite atmosphere about them. So that was where I came up from. As far as my influences for illustrations, that's a very simple list to go down. Edward Gorey is sitting at the top of that list, along with Sir John Tenniel, the illustrator of the Alice books, Alice in Wonderland Through the Looking Glass. And in addition to that, Aubrey Beardsley and Gustave Doré, the engraver. And those are that's probably the list right there of the ones that influenced me most, working on my style as I was growing up and even to this day. There you go. Erik?
Yeah, I'm a bit like Wolfgang. I was a slow, what they call a reluctant reader, slow reader. I probably had some neurodiversity issues that went undiagnosed, because back then you just said, oh, you're just not very bright, so I was kind of slow in the uptake on discovering the joy of reading on my own. That didn't happen until probably around high school for me, but I do remember being read to, and I had one teacher in the 5th grade. I'll share there's one scene from one book for me. Like many kids, I'm traumatized by where the red fern grows. I don't know if anyone else would have that read to in school, but there's one scene in particular of horrific violence where a kid falls on an axe. And what I remember, so I haven't looked back at that book for years, but I remember that the main character looks at the kid's mouth, and it's open, and there's a bubble of blood, that rises up out of his open mouth. And I'm still getting over that moment, because I had such a sheltered childhood. Like, I wasn't allowed to watch the Three Stooges because it was too violent, with the poke in the eyes and that kind of. So that scene just was so memorable for me, and I think it's because of the specificity of that singular description that really made it very real for me, that I wanted to do something like that, to think that, oh, I know in my mind this didn't really happen, but wow, it feels like it did. And I love the idea of creating something that is like just making it up, but making it up in such a compelling way that it feels real to the reader, to the listener.
Those are all excellent answers. May I ask real quick, actually, if Wolfgang and John, what is your favorite of the short stories in your collection? If you have a favorite, it's okay if you don't. I was just curious, as everybody was talking about their influences.
I think that mine is Interference, because of the drawing that I did for it specifically. I wanted to try and achieve something in that drawing, and I think I succeeded. Now you're going to have to buy the book to see what it was, because Wolfgang's not going to show you that picture.
And you can get it at the book festival, so woohoo!
Yeah, exactly.
And
You'll
get
have
it signed by both of them.
to see it after you bought the book, so you'll see what I'm talking about. But is it okay if I give spoilers, Wolfgang, or do we need to stay away from that?
Let's stay away from spoilers, but
okay.
I will interject to say, let's see, Malcolm stays out past his curfew and discovers that he isn't alone. That's
your favorite?
The synopsis for the story. Well, that's Interference.
Oh no, I'm not. I'm thinking of the wrong one again. I don't know why I keep going with the.
Are you thinking of Floaters?
Yes, I'm thinking of Floaters,
Yeah.
and I know it's called Floaters. So why do I always? I don't know. Floaters. That's the one.
Floaters. The synopsis is Micah keeps a secret from her family and even her best friends that might just cost her everything. The main character is blind. And sees for the first time, sees something for the first time. It's kind of the inciting incident for that story. I would be really tempted to pick that one too, but I think the one that, I don't know, I think almost guarantee, like, actually, Kathryn, what was your favorite one?
My favorite one was the first one with the books.
Was it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I thought interference was the creepiest one for me personally.
sure.
But yes, the books, maybe because that's a writer thing, I liked the book one. So
Okay, all right. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think Thing in the Sky is my favorite. So Thing in the Sky is Hugo lives through the morning, the sun doesn't rise, and must learn to find the light in Earth's darkest days. So I think for me, that one ends on kind of a positive note. It's probably the story that's the most rooted in character. And the other thing too is I was a child who cried himself to sleep for a year because of my existential dread and the end of the world. And so kind of taking that head on, especially writing, using an allegory for things that children can't control, like war and climate change, and just the whole burning basket that they're born into and just kind of heaved out into the world into. So that one I think is that one I think for me is my favorite because it's probably in the real world like the most useful, and I think probably one that will stick with the readers the most because
yeah.
Well, it's all around you.
I'm a pretty wimpy sort of person too. So my coworker and I were talking about the scary stories to tell in the dark, and like the ribbon that was around the one's neck, and like that still terrifies me to this day.
Oh yeah.
So yes, the books are my cup of tea. So, but they were all really fun. I really enjoyed it. So I knew this hour was going to go really fast. Does our panelists, do we have a couple minutes extra to answer a couple audience questions? Is that okay? Okay. Much appreciated. And we will, I'll just have whoever wants to answer these can kind of hop in. I do definitely want to get to this one over here in the chat before it disappears on me. And do you know the ending of your book before writing? Do you start backwards and know what's going to happen, or do you start and figure it out as you go? This kind of goes into the theme of, I guess, are you a pantser or a plotter sort of a thing? So kind of what is your style for writing and process? And whoever wants to hop in is very welcome to.
Natalie, we can't hear you.
Yep, you're muted, Natalie. Sorry.
I was going to say, I'll be very, very quick with this. Andrea. If only I knew the ending of my books, my writing process would be so much quicker. So no, I don't. I wish I did, but I do think for me, I would not be able to write with suspense if I absolutely knew the ending of my book, because I'd be like, yeah, I know how it works out. Part of the suspense for me is not knowing how in the world I'm getting out of it. So it lets me embed myself a little bit more fully in my characters and be really kind of lost in the like, I don't know what's coming. I don't know what's going on. So there are pieces I know, but they always twist around, and I never, ever have my ending right. There are so many times, 11 books in, I can tell you, I'll go in and be like, I know this is how it ends, and it doesn't. So that for me.
You get to surprise yourself when you're writing.
I'm the absolute opposite of that. I map it out. I know all the plot points. I know how the story is going to go front to back before I ever start writing it. I will give the analogy that I like to have the entire labyrinth built and know and create my minotaur, so that when I release the reader into the maze, I can just toy with them and terrify them and terrorize them as much as I want, because I know I'll win in the end.
Eric, any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'm somewhere in the middle. I can always see kind of like the car's headlights. I can see like a little bit further. So I when a book idea comes to me, it comes to me in a patchwork like of scenes, and I often don't know the order of those scenes, but I have a general idea of kind of the feeling that I want to get to at the end. It is, with this last book, I wasn't loving how it ended. I thought I knew the answer to that. I kind of had an idea, and I threw it in the trash and started over. The ending that's published is completely different than what I originally started with. So I guess when I think I know, I'd love to be the puppet master with the labyrinth, but I haven't got to that level yet. I'm still kind of just bumbling around. Like I thought I had it, and then I was like, oh wait, this sucks. And then had to get it somewhere better. But I had to work that out first.
I love that.
Erik, I love that so much. I was like, yeah, that's me. Like, whoa, that sucks. I gotta fix
and then when I redid the ending, then I realized, oh, well, I want to change my beginning a little bit. So then the nice thing about, as a writer, I redid the beginning so that it looks like I knew exactly what was going to happen in the end, but in truth, I did not.
Well, and I always hear as well that, so many books take, just because a process worked for one doesn't mean it will work for the other one. So it could be a pantser for one and a plotter for the next. So, and John, how about for your illustrations? Do you kind of already have a very, idea in your mind, or is it kind of organic as, unplanned out and just kind of, you let the pencil take you?
It is interesting that I do have an idea in my mind, but I can't see what that idea is. I would equate it to having a photograph at the far end of a dark room. I can see the photograph. I can tell that there are elements in it and there is some kind of arrangement to those elements, but that's as much as I can see. My style is very much an uncovering of what's already on the page. I'm not putting marks down on the page. I'm removing the part of the blank paper that was covering the mark that was supposed to be there. So it builds up over time, which means that until the very end, I really don't know what the total picture is going to look like. But the more I do, the better an idea I get. That's the best way I can explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always fascinating to hear everybody's answers for that. Let's see. So real quick for Natalie, do you have any thoughts on what is allowed in YA in regards to kind of fear and horror and suspense versus middle grade? Kind of any tips for that?
I don't think there are rules. I don't. I really don't think that there are things you absolutely categorically cannot have. I think that it really depends on what is this book? What is your audience? What is the purpose of the book? And where does your editor want to sell this book? And that's important for me, for where I work. Like, if my editor says, you know what, I really want to gear this towards a slightly younger audience, they may choose to kind of help me edit my violence to a place where it's a little more palatable to a younger audience or a typical younger audience. So I don't think there are rules. I have read incredibly, incredibly dark content in middle grade and in YA. There are no limits. It is just a matter of how it's going to be presented. And I think that's really the question, not the content. The content can be whatever it needs to be for the story, but it's how you present it. I think that's a little different.
Thank you so much. Our last audience question, and I think this could be a quick one too. We'll shorten it down to what is one favorite thing about being an author or illustrator for each of you? And whoever wants to hop in can do so.
Okay. I love reader responses. Oh, sorry.
All right, I'll lead off with this one because it's actually very simple. I am fascinated to find out what I am about to create and to be able to bring something into the world that didn't already exist. I'm doing something new that was never done before, and I'm not going to know what that thing is until I've finished it, which has the unfortunate result of me not being interested in my work too much once it's done, because now I want to know what that next thing is going to be. But the process itself is very rewarding, just finding out where I'm going with this.
That's wonderful.
Mine is readers, one word, my readers, amazing. I'm so blessed.
And now you get a whole new audience of readers too with the middle grade. So, yay, doubled your audience. Erik or Wolfgang?
I'm with Natalie on readers. Specifically, I like getting a specific response. Like when somebody when you find out that an idea you had in your head is now kind of swimming around in somebody else's head, it's a really satisfying feeling to I mean, we read and we write largely to feel less alone in the universe. And and as a writer, when you get to go to events and stuff where you interact with people who've read your work and they say something specific where it's like, oh, you got that thing I was intending to, like, I was really trying to do that one thing and you got it. So it worked. Thank you. Can I have a hug now? You know,
I feel better. I feel better. I love
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
That's great. And Wolfgang, what's your favorite part?
The freedom of creation. I don't know. The modern age doesn't really afford much freedom. I think for a lot of people, me being one of them. So it is it's liberating to my soul to be able to write. But I don't actually think of my writers. I am very grateful that people actually do buy and read my books, and when I put out new ones, they show up and buy them and they read them. But I think for me, like while I'm working, I'm just in it. I'm really like the most critical audience member. So it has to be something that really engages me, because if it's not, I'm not going to write it. I'll abandon it. But yeah, just I think being in those moments where I'm like completely lost in the story and I'm not living in this world. That's like that's the rewarding part of it. When it comes to the editing and packaging, and there are aspects of that stuff I like, but after the story's done, that's when the art stops and it becomes a product that I have to kind of in some ways divorce myself from. And if parts have to be cut, if it has to be, whatever has to be done to make it, for the cheese to go around the pill, that's it, because that's the nature of the beast. And publishing's really, really tough. And it's a lot of work. But that creation, that part of it, that's not work. That's all great. So for me, like that's the part that I look forward to. And then I realize like afterward, it's kind of a slog, because that's when the editing comes in and the packaging comes in and the layout, all that stuff can be like a major drag. There are parts of it I like, but yeah, that freedom there's nothing like it.
Great. No dreading the white page for you. I know that's lots of authors dread that white page, but
I got the plan. I never have a white page.
Yes. These have been awesome questions. Our final is just, can you let us know what's next for you, if you're able? I know sometimes folks are under contracts and can't say much, but if you can give us a little teaser of what is next for you, and we'll just do alphabetical for that. So, John, next for you.
Whatever Wolfgang tells me is next for me. No, I already know the next illustrations that are coming up, some of them. It's a complicated process by which they're going to be released. But we've got one that's nailed down. All I have to do, it's complete in my head. All I have to do is see it on a piece of paper right now. And so that's my next step. But it's just the next illustration for another story in the series of stories that he's writing.
Hey, well, I'm glad there will be more of those for sure.
Me too.
Wolfgang, anything to add to that?
Other than, well, before I start Too Scary to Read Alone 2, I'm repackaging the Crime Cats books. So they got a kind of a spit shine, new editing. Also, here's my tip to any writers out there that are watching this. Don't delete entire manuscripts of books, because when I went to edit the Crime Cats books, book 2 had been deleted completely. So I had to get a copy that had been printed and retype the entire thing. That was super fun. But I'm doing it. Yeah, I'm doing 10th anniversary editions of those books. 10 years ago, I started self-publishing. I had no idea what I was doing. And now I have a better idea of what I'm doing. So I feel like I'm kind of like giving these stories that have really been loved by a lot of people, kind of the presentation and platform that they deserved in the first place. I'm also the writer that the books deserve, so I can kind of clean them up in a way to keep them what they were, just make it read a little smoother. And then after I'm done with those, I just got the first one pretty much finished. I'll probably do like another month or two of that, and then I'm going to start planning the next two scary.
Excellent. Very exciting.
I will get to Crime Cats though, because I do see Courtney talking about yay Crime Cats. I do plan to return to Crime Cats though. Yes.
Excellent. Yes, very exciting. Natalie, I know something is around the corner for you very soon.
It is around the corner soon. 49 Miles Alone is coming out July 2nd of this year. That is a young adult, not a middle grade. It's a little dark, so just be aware if you like a lighter book. This is not lighter. It is set in the Utah backcountry and follows two girls, one of whom has survived something pretty horrific. They are hiking alone in the Utah backcountry. They are 3 days away from help in any direction without any cell service, and they are not as alone as they think in the desert. So it is definitely a thriller, a bit survival thriller, and a bit regular thriller, and kind of a survival story on every front.
There might be a read in the daylight one as well. It sounded like. And here, Erik, how about what's next for you?
I have a new sci-fi action adventure coming. And it's not the third in the Far-Flung Falls series. I'm going to toggle back and forth between that and a new series with a boy main character. And
What's the title?
that's all I just had a conversation about it today. And
Okay.
that's all I can say.
That sounds
I'm really
okay.
excited about it.
It's a to be continued.
Yeah, I don't.
Get the reveal.
I don't have a launch date yet. So hopefully I'll have that soon. But yeah, really excited about it. Same spirit. It's going a little further, deeper into sci-fi, which is fun for me. I felt like the Far-Flung Falls was like a sci-fi light. You know, it's not aliens or UFOs or anything. This gets a little more into that, into the things about the genre that I've always loved growing up with it.
Yay. Well, super excited to hear about all of that, and we'll be eagerly awaiting all of your new projects, and excited to read. If folks in the audience haven't read your current ones we were talking about this evening, hopefully, and Wolfgang and John's book is just coming out. Or is it officially out yet, or is it in the coming?
No, it comes out April 20.
That's the first day you can get it then.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
I got a sneak peek, so yes. So yeah, so we'll be very excited for all these new projects for you, as well as the ones we talked about this evening. So this has been such a fun conversation. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thank you for our panelists for going over a little bit and answering those couple questions. I know everybody appreciates it, and they were great questions. So just to wrap us up, a huge thank you again to everybody this evening, and our panelists, John Anderson, Wolfgang Parker, Natalie D. Richards, and Erik John Slangerup. You can see all of them in person at the Ohioana Book Festival on Saturday, April 20th from 10:30 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. And that is at the Columbus Metropolitan Library's main branch in downtown Columbus. Visit ohioana.org for more information about the big event. And if you're joining us today from afar, you can also grab copies of these books from the Book Loft of German Village at bookloft.com. And the extra awesome thing is that a portion of every book sale for the festival goes to Ohioana and helps make programs just like this possible. So also a big thank you again to all of the Ohioana Book Festival sponsors and partners. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This has really just been tons of fun. I've really enjoyed talking with you all. Middle grade is just, always just a wonderful conversation. It always has the, the best authors and illustrators too to chat with. So yeah, this has just been a great evening. And we hope to see you in person at the festival, everybody in the audience. So just thank you so much, and good night, everyone.
Have a great night. Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
See you there.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.